Hi, I know I'm just a cat, but I believe in kindness. If you click subscribe under this video, you'll make my day.
You know, people always say, parents love their kids equally, like it's some universal truth carved in stone. But the thing is, there's always a favorite. You might not want to admit it. You might convince yourself you're imagining it. You might even bury it deep enough to believe it never existed. But I swear to God, when your mom gives your brother a lake house and won't even cover your hospital bills, that illusion shatters like a champagne glass on concrete. And the worst part? She'll still look you in the eye and say, "We love you equally." Like that's supposed to mean something. Like that's not the most insulting thing a parent could say after slicing their love clean down the middle and handing him the bigger half. I remember the first time I noticed the imbalance. I was 9, Jake was 6, and we were at the grocery store. He smashed a glass jar of pickles because he thought it'd be funny. My mom laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Oh Jake, you little rascal." 2 weeks earlier, I had dropped a plastic container of yogurt by accident, and she didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. That's how it was. Jake could crash through the world with his arms wide open, and someone would always catch him. Me? I learned early to walk carefully, speak softly, and not need too much. I was the one who had it together. I was the responsible one, the independent one. I wore that badge like a damn straitjacket. As we got older, the gap widened. Jake flunked out of college in his second year, too many parties, not enough classes. My mom's response? College isn't for everyone. He's just trying to find his path. When I got into grad school with a full ride, she barely mentioned it at Thanksgiving. "Oh, that's nice, honey," she said, while asking Jake if he wanted more stuffing. I remember sitting there, chewing on that dry-ass turkey, wondering why my accomplishments always felt like white noise to her. I used to think maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was too sensitive. But then things got loud, real loud, and no amount of pretending could make it go quiet again. It all came to a head last summer, in the most casual, throwaway way possible. We were at her house. Jake was there too, of course, sprawled out on the couch like he owned the place, sipping on one of Dad's old bourbons like it was Sunday ritual. I'd driven down for the weekend after rescheduling work meetings and skipping a friend's birthday. I do that kind of thing a lot, rearrange my life for family. I don't even know why anymore. Guilt, probably. Habit, maybe. The invisible leash of being the good one. We were talking about the old lake house, our grandparents' place in Vermont. Nothing fancy, but peaceful. Big porch, creaky floors, the kind of place that smelled like pine needles and old books. It had been sitting empty for years after Grandpa died. I'd always assumed we'd sell it eventually, maybe split whatever we got. Turns out, plans had already been made. My mother said it casually, like she was discussing what to have for lunch. "Well, Jake's going to take the lake house. He's always loved it up there." I blinked. "Wait, what?" She repeated it, slower this time, as if I was hard of hearing. "Jake is getting the lake house. We signed over the deed last month." I looked at Jake. He grinned, shrugged, like he'd just won a scratch off and didn't know how. He didn't even try to hide the smugness. I stared at my mother, waiting for the explanation that never came. No discussion, no fairness, no, "We talked to both of you." Just a decision made without me, and served up like a cold slice of indifference. I couldn't even find the words to argue. I just sat there, stunned, thinking about every sacrifice I'd made, every time I'd stepped up, every holiday I'd hosted, every emergency where I dropped everything to help her or Jake or both. And now he gets a house. I get, what? A glass of wine and the honor of witnessing it? Later that night, after Jake left, I asked her why. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just asked, calmly, why him? She looked me dead in the eye and said, "We love you equally. He just needed it more." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd it broke something in me. He needed it more? This man-child who can't hold down a job for more than a year, who treats life like one long tailgate party, needed it more than the daughter who paid her own way through school, who works 60-hour weeks, who's always been there. Needed it more? And still, she stuck with that line. "We love you equally." That sentence, it didn't just hurt. It insulted every memory I had of biting my tongue while she praised Jake's mediocrity and overlooked my effort. It mocked every moment I told myself maybe I was wrong, maybe I was just imagining things. That sentence was her trying to clean the blood off her hands with a napkin. So I drove home that weekend with my teeth clenched and my thoughts on fire. My husband, Tom, took one look at me when I walked in the door and said, "What happened?" And all I could say was, "They gave Jake the lake house." His eyes widened, but he didn't ask why. He already knew. He's been watching this dynamic unfold for years. He knows how many times I've cried in our kitchen over something my mother said or didn't say. How many times I've swallowed it down and smiled through it. That was the moment I decided something. I didn't announce it. I didn't write some big, dramatic message. I just made a quiet promise to myself I wasn't going to be the one chasing anymore. I was done playing the good daughter. And if she ever wanted to know why I don't come home for Christmas or Mother's Day or her birthday, well, maybe she could ask Jake. But the story doesn't end there. That lake house was only the beginning. Because 2 months later, something happened that pushed everything over the edge. Something that would have changed everything if only I had a mother who actually gave a damn. And that's when it got personal. The thing about being the reliable one, the self-sufficient one, the one who never asks for too much, is that eventually people start treating your strength like it's infinite, like you'll always figure it out, like you never bleed, never break. Never find yourself staring at a blank wall wondering how in the hell you ended up being the one left out in the cold. I'd always known, somewhere deep down, that I'd never be the child she'd drop everything for, but I still held on to this childish hope that when it really mattered, when things got serious, when I was no longer just asking for recognition but for help, she'd show up. But she didn't. She never even flinched. It started with pain, dull, bloated, dragging through the day pain that I tried to ignore for weeks, because that's what I do. I push through, I minimize, I suck it up. Then one night, standing in the bathroom brushing my teeth, I doubled over so fast Tom thought I'd slipped and hit my head. I couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe properly. It felt like something inside me had snapped, or maybe grown too big to be ignored any longer. After 2 days, an ultrasound, and a series of tests, I was sitting in a cramped specialist's office being told I had multiple fibroids, one of them large enough to press against my bladder and cause all kinds of complications. The doctor recommended surgery, not life-threatening, but necessary and soon. I nodded, trying to stay composed as he explained the costs and insurance gaps and the what-if scenarios like they were just routine bullet points in a PowerPoint presentation. But all I could think was, I can't afford this. The surgery, even with insurance, would run just over $7,000. We'd been saving for a bathroom remodel and a vacation we'd been putting off for years, but that money vanished in a flash, swallowed whole by hospital paperwork and pre-op procedures. We weren't broke, but we were stretched, and the thought of draining our savings and racking up credit cards while still juggling mortgage payments and daily expenses made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fibroids. So, against every instinct I had, I picked up the phone and called my mother. I rehearsed what I'd say for hours, calm, factual, not emotional. I'd remind her how rarely I asked for anything, how I'd been handling everything on my own since I was 19, how I wasn't expecting a gift, just a temporary loan. I made sure to sound steady, composed, unemotional, because God forbid I came off as needy. When she picked up, she sounded cheerful, in that distracted, chirpy way she always used when she didn't actually want to know how I was. We exchanged small talk, meaningless and shallow, until I finally said it. "Mom, I need to ask you something important." I told her everything briefly, efficiently, laying out the facts like I was presenting a business plan. When I got to the part about the cost, I felt this horrible flush of embarrassment creep up my neck, but I kept going. I told her it would mean the world if she could help with part of it, even just a few thousand, and I'd pay her back in monthly installments. There was a pause, sharp, loaded, too long. Then she sighed and said, "Oh, Laura, I just don't think it would be fair for me to help you like that. I mean, what if Jake needed something next month? I can't take sides." I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just sat there with the phone to my ear, blinking at the absurdity of it all. I wasn't asking her to buy me a boat. I was asking for help with a surgery. Something necessary. Medical. Urgent. And she was still trying to balance some invisible fairness scale between her grown-ass children, like it was a game of Monopoly. I think what hurt most wasn't even the refusal. It was how casually she delivered it, how utterly unaffected she seemed by the fact that her daughter was in physical pain and financial distress, and all she could talk about was balance, as if equality was a thing she could measure in dollars and apologies. I ended the call politely. I said I understood. I said we'd figure it out. And then I went to the bathroom and vomited, not from the pain, but from the shame. I'd never begged her for anything. Not after Dad died. Not when I worked 2 jobs in college. Not when Tom lost his job and we almost lost the house. And now, when I finally reached out, when I finally asked, she had looked at my open hands and turned away. A week later, I was lying on the couch, pale and groggy from pre-surgical meds, scrolling through Facebook to distract myself. That's when I saw it, Jake standing in front of the lake house, arm around Mom, both of them smiling like a damn Hallmark postcard. The caption read, "First weekend at the new place. Thanks, Mom. Can't wait to make some memories." I stared at that photo for a long time. Not because I was surprised, I think some part of me had been waiting for this, but because it finally made everything real. She hadn't just refused to help me. She'd refused because she had already chosen where to spend her generosity. And it wasn't on me. It was on Jake. It was always going to be on Jake. I closed the app, turned off my phone, and stared at the ceiling for a full hour. Tom sat beside me in silence, holding my hand. He didn't need to ask what I was thinking. He already knew. It was the first time in my adult life I decided, with total certainty, that I wasn't going back for Thanksgiving. Not this year. Not any year that followed, unless something changed so fundamentally that pigs started flying and hell froze over. But what came next didn't just confirm my decision, it turned it into something else entirely. Because when you push the good daughter too far, when you make her beg and then humiliate her, you don't just lose her loyalty. You create something much more dangerous. You create silence. And silence, in a family built on guilt and manipulation, is a weapon far more effective than screaming ever could be. The thing about not showing up for Thanksgiving when you've always been the one who brings the wine, roasts the turkey, smooths over the awkward silences, and washes every damn dish afterward, is that your absence doesn't go unnoticed, it becomes the main course. And when you have a mother like mine, who's perfected the art of subtle emotional warfare, silence isn't just an absence, it's an attack. The passive-aggressive voicemails started the Monday before Thanksgiving, each one more syrupy than the last, layered with faux concern and loaded guilt, like she'd been watching some twisted Hallmark drama and decided to play every manipulative trope at once. "Hi, sweetie. Just checking in. Jake's going to make his famous green bean casserole. I know how much you love it. Hope you're still planning to come. Let me know what pie you're bringing." I didn't respond. The next day, she upped the ante. "Laura, I'm getting a little worried. Haven't heard from you. I know things have been complicated lately, but family is important. And Thanksgiving is about forgiveness." Forgiveness. That word hit me like a punch in the ribs, not because I didn't understand it, but because I knew exactly what she meant by it. In my mother's world, forgiveness wasn't a mutual process built on accountability, it was a demand. A one-sided expectation. She could do whatever she wanted, and I was expected to let it go for the sake of family harmony. Her version of forgiveness meant I had to erase her refusal to help me when I needed it most, swallow the fact that she handed my brother a house while I struggled to afford surgery, and smile across the dinner table like nothing ever happened. That wasn't forgiveness, that was surrender. Thanksgiving came and went without us. Tom and I stayed home, just the two of us, watching old movies and eating takeout from the Thai place around the corner. It was the most peaceful holiday I'd had in years. No forced cheer, no uncomfortable silences punctuated by Jake's latest bad joke, no endless parade of, "Aren't you going to settle down and have kids?" from distant cousins. Just quiet. And you know what? I didn't miss it. Not even a little. But my absence lit a fuse under my mother like nothing ever had. She'd spent years building the illusion of a perfect, intact family, photos on the mantle, Christmas cards with carefully cropped smiles, phone calls full of half-truths, and now that image had a crack. One daughter missing. One plate empty. One chair unclaimed. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about how my absence made her look. And in her world, appearances were everything. A week later, I got an email. Long, rambling, and riddled with emotional landmines. She opened with concern, transitioned to confusion, and landed squarely in accusation. "I don't know why you're acting this way," she wrote, as if I'd thrown a tantrum over nothing. "You've always been so stable, so strong. I just don't understand why you're being so dramatic." Dramatic. That word stuck in my throat like a splinter. I was dramatic because I didn't want to sit at the same table with people who'd let me bleed alone. I was dramatic because I dared to say, through my absence, that what happened mattered. I read the rest of the email, and the more I read, the angrier I got. It wasn't even the content, it was the tone. The casual dismissal of my pain, the rewriting of history in her own favor, the total lack of accountability. So I wrote back. And for the first time in my life, I didn't filter. I didn't soften the edges. I didn't try to be the reasonable daughter who makes things easier for everyone else. I wrote the truth, every detail, every slight, every wound I'd kept quiet about for the last 20 years. I told her how it felt to always be the afterthought, the one expected to understand, to forgive, to show up. I told her how her refusal to help me during a medical crisis broke something fundamental inside me, something I don't know if I can ever rebuild. I told her that giving Jake the lake house wasn't just about money, it was about what she was willing to give, and to whom. I told her that her love has always come with conditions, and that maybe, just maybe, I was done trying to meet them. I didn't expect a thank you or an apology. I didn't expect anything, really. But what I got shocked me more than silence ever could. Because instead of writing back, my mother forwarded my email to every single member of our extended family. She sent it to my aunt in Chicago, to my cousins in Denver, to my dad's old sister in Florida. She even sent it to Jake, who I'm sure read it while sipping coffee in his lakefront deck chair. She didn't just air our dirty laundry, she threw it all over the yard and lit it on fire. And at the top of the forwarded message, she added a note: "Laura has been struggling emotionally. I thought you should all see what we've been dealing with." I stared at the screen, numb. Not hurt. Not surprised. Just hollow. That email wasn't about concern, it was about control. She wanted to shame me into silence. She wanted to reassert her narrative, that I was unstable, irrational, overreacting. And if she couldn't convince me, she'd try to convince everyone else. That was the moment I understood something so clearly, it was like someone flipped on a light in a pitch-black room. This wasn't about a house. It wasn't about money. It was about power. About control. About maintaining the hierarchy she'd carefully constructed, where Jake was always the child in need of support, and I was the one who didn't deserve it because I never needed it loudly enough. Until now. I didn't reply to the family. I didn't explain or defend myself. Because nothing I said would matter. Those who understood wouldn't need an explanation, and those who didn't never would. What I did do, however, was something far quieter and far more devastating. I disappeared. I changed my email address. I left the family group chat. I blocked Jake's number and removed every single relative from my social media. I didn't scream, didn't argue, didn't demand understanding. I just vanished. Because sometimes, the loudest statement you can make is the one no one sees coming. And that silence? It worked like acid. Slowly, quietly, it began to eat away at the story she'd been telling for years. Because you can't play the victim if no one shows up to watch. And the more she tried to explain my absence, the more questions people began to ask. But what came next wasn't something even I expected. Because as she tried to draw me back in, to repair the illusion of togetherness, she didn't realize I had already started planning my own version of closure. And it wasn't going to look anything like forgiveness. People talk a lot about revenge like it's this big, dramatic, fiery spectacle. Yelling matches in public, slamming doors, lawsuits, betrayal shouted from rooftops, but the truth is, the most devastating revenge doesn't make a sound. It doesn't need to. Sometimes the most powerful response is a quiet refusal, a soft but absolute decision to remove yourself from the stage entirely and let the people who thrived on your presence finally feel the weight of your absence. There is a particular kind of vengeance in withholding access, especially when you've been the one holding the family together for so long that they forgot they were standing on your shoulders in the first place. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly, the way rot sets into the beams of a house long before the walls start to crack. My phone rang less often, which wasn't a problem, since I no longer picked up when it did. I stopped sending birthday cards, stopped liking photos of Jake's dog or my cousin's baby, stopped forwarding recipes and family updates. I didn't explain myself, didn't leave a message in a bottle, didn't make any announcements about needing space. I simply stepped back and let the space speak for itself. And at first, I think they assumed it was a phase. A tantrum. They thought I'd get over it, that I'd eventually call, apologize even, and say something vague like, let's just move on. But that call never came. And when it didn't, I could feel the discomfort setting in like cold air seeping through a cracked window. Carol, my mother, though the word started to feel more like a title than a relationship, began to send gifts. Not thoughtful, meaningful ones. No, her offerings were always performative, almost mechanical. A box of peppermint bark for Christmas, a scarf I'd never wear for my birthday, a text message on the morning of my surgery that read, "Good luck, hope it goes smoothly," as if I were heading to the dentist instead of getting carved open. She never asked how I was feeling afterward. Never followed up. Never offered help. Just the bare minimum to make herself feel like she hadn't abandoned me. Jake, of course, stayed silent. He never reached out. Never asked if I was okay. Never acknowledged what had happened, either with the surgery or the email or the house. He existed in a bubble, inflated and reinforced by years of maternal protection, floating above consequences and responsibility like a party balloon that just wouldn't pop. I didn't expect anything from him, and he delivered exactly that. But over time, cracks began to form in their pristine little world, and those cracks had nothing to do with me. Jake's marriage, already rocky, finally buckled under the pressure of his inability to grow up. His wife left him, took the kids, and moved in with her sister in upstate New York. Jake stayed in the lake house, which now felt less like a prize and more like a punishment, an echo chamber of mistakes and memories he didn't have the emotional capacity to face. He stopped posting pictures. Stopped smiling in the few he did share. And the house, beautiful as it was, began to look like a prison cell with granite countertops. My mother tried to manage the fallout, as she always did. She helped him cover the property taxes when he missed payments, took care of the landscaping when he stopped hiring help, even drove up once a month to clean. But the weight of him, his irresponsibility, his neediness, his constant emotional bailouts, was finally starting to bend her spine, and I think she hated that I wasn't there to share the load. I'd been the unacknowledged counterbalance for so long that my absence threw everything out of alignment. She never said it out loud, but I saw it in the messages she sent every few weeks long, rambling texts filled with nostalgic stories, veiled apologies disguised as memories, and that constant undercurrent of desperation. Why won't you come home? I miss your voice. You've changed. Yes, I had changed. I'd stopped trying to be what she needed. Stopped pretending I was okay with being second. Stopped chasing her approval like a dog begging for scraps. I'd spent years bending myself into the version of a daughter she could love, and now that I stood up straight, she didn't know where to put me. The discomfort she felt wasn't grief, it was confusion. She didn't know how to love me without control. One afternoon in early spring, I got a voicemail from her. Her voice was thinner than usual, slightly raspy, and though she tried to sound composed, there was a tremble at the edge of her words that gave her away. "Laura," she said, "I had a little health scare last week, nothing major, just a dizzy spell and a trip to the ER, but it made me think. I don't know what I did to deserve this silence from you. I've always tried my best, even if I didn't always get it right. I miss you. Please, please call me back." I listened to that message 3 times. Not because I was thinking about calling her back, but because I wanted to be sure I understood every word, every nuance, every deflection. Even in what was clearly an attempt to bridge the gap, she couldn't say it, couldn't say she was sorry, couldn't acknowledge what she did. She wanted to patch things up, but not by owning any of the damage. Just by moving forward like the wreckage wasn't still smoldering behind us. And I think that's when I knew, this wasn't just a break in our relationship. This was the end of the version of me that needed anything from her. I didn't need an apology anymore. I didn't need her to admit that she had failed me when it mattered. I didn't even need her to understand why I walked away. I just needed her to feel it. To sit in the absence and realize that love, once neglected and taken for granted long enough, doesn't die in some dramatic explosion. It just quietly slips out the door and doesn't come back. She thought I'd frozen her out. That wasn't true. I hadn't gone cold. I'd just gone still. And in that stillness, I'd found more clarity than I ever had in her chaos. The silence wasn't punishment, it was preservation. And as the weight of her own choices began to close in, I let her sit with them. I let her feel what it's like when the daughter who always showed up simply stops showing up. But I wasn't done yet. Not quite. Because while she clung to the image of reconciliation, I was already working on the final chapter. The one thing she never saw coming. The one message she'd never be able to ignore. And it would arrive in a box. Framed, wrapped, and delivered with the exact kind of precision she'd always claimed to appreciate. There comes a point where clarity stops feeling like a painful revelation and starts settling into something more permanent, something more structural, like the foundation of a house that, while cracked, now finally reflects the reality of what was always there. In the months that followed my mother's voicemail, the one soaked in nostalgia and avoidance, the one that skirted ownership with the grace of someone who's made denial an art form, I felt not vindicated, but still. There was no rush of triumph, no cinematic swell of victory. Just the long, steady confirmation that I had done the right thing by stepping away, and that peace, when it finally finds you, doesn't make a lot of noise, it just sinks in quietly, like warm water filling a cold tub. By then, Jake's situation had deteriorated further in ways that I can't even pretend surprised me. The lake house, once paraded around like a trophy, had become a financial and emotional sinkhole. Maintenance costs stacked up like bricks, the taxes more than he'd bothered to research, and the novelty of lakefront living wore off fast when there were no parties to throw, no family to impress, and no one to witness his version of success. Carol, naturally, had tried to patch the holes, sent him money, made phone calls, pulled strings, but even she had her limits. Retirement had started tightening its grip on her bank account, and with her health not being what it once was, she couldn't drive upstate every time he neglected the plumbing or forgot to clear the gutters before the winter storms rolled in. What she had given him as a symbol of love and legacy had turned into an anchor around his neck, and now he was scrambling for a way out. I heard about it through a mutual acquaintance, an old high school friend of Jake's who still followed me on social media and sent a casual message one day. "Hey, saw your brother's selling the lake house. Thought you might be interested." The listing was easy enough to find. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, wraparound porch, charming rustic aesthetic, priced below market value and clearly in distress. The photos told their own story: patchy lawn, flaking paint, unkempt trees casting long, claw-like shadows across the yard. The place didn't look like a dream anymore. It looked like a mistake. One he couldn't afford to carry, but also couldn't admit had ever been a mistake to begin with. I didn't buy the house out of spite. I need to make that clear. It wasn't revenge for the surgery, or the years of favoritism, or even the public shaming via email. It was something else entirely. It was closure, not the symbolic kind, but the kind you can hold in your hands, walk through, repaint, reclaim. The kind that lets you sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and say, without speaking, that you took something broken and made it your own. I contacted a lawyer. I made the offer through an LLC with a generic name. Cash, clean, quick. Jake never knew who the buyer was. And that, I think, was the final twist of the knife, not knowing, not understanding, just watching the last symbol of his unearned privilege slip through his fingers into the arms of a stranger who would never tell him why it all unraveled. After the closing, I waited a few weeks before I sent the box. I knew my mother would be home, recovering from her mild health scare, likely still replaying the voicemail in her head, imagining herself as the aging matriarch abandoned by her ungrateful daughter, building narratives where she was misunderstood, misjudged, mistreated. She had always been a master of painting herself as the victim, even while holding the brush that colored every painful scene. The package arrived on a Tuesday. I timed it intentionally. Tuesdays were quiet for her. No bridge club, no book group, no excuses to be elsewhere. Inside the box was a frame, simple, black, elegant. Inside the frame was a printed copy of the email I had sent months before, the one she had forwarded to the family in an act of preemptive self-defense, trying to make me look irrational before anyone could ask if she had, perhaps, pushed me too far. I had it printed in clean, serif type, on thick linen paper, the kind they use for diplomas or award certificates. Underneath the email, I included a handwritten note on a small card. It said, simply, "You wanted to remember what broke us. Here it is." I never got a response. No phone call, no message, no thank you, no apology. Just silence. And that, in its own way, was confirmation. She finally understood that I was done playing her game. That I had found a way to say everything I needed to say without raising my voice, without involving the rest of the family, without stooping to her tactics. I'd left her with her stories, her memories, and her carefully curated version of events, and removed myself from the narrative entirely. That Christmas, Tom and I went up to the lake house. We didn't decorate, didn't invite anyone, didn't post photos. We brought wine, books, warm socks, and the kind of food you eat slowly, because there's no one rushing you. I sat on that creaky porch, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, staring out at the frozen lake while snow fell in slow, heavy flakes, and for the first time in my life, I felt what people mean when they say peace isn't a place, it's a decision. I don't hate my mother. I'm not sure I ever really did. Hate requires energy, and at some point, I just stopped having any left for her. What I feel now is something quieter, something simpler, indifference, maybe. Or understanding. A cold, clean understanding that people don't always love you the way you need them to. Sometimes they love you the only way they know how, clumsily, conditionally, through the fog of their own insecurities and preferences and failures. And when that kind of love stops being enough, you don't scream. You don't beg. You don't try to fix it. You just leave. Jake still doesn't know who owns the house. Maybe someday he will. Maybe he'll walk by it, see a light on, and feel something he doesn't have the words for. Maybe he'll tell himself it doesn't matter. Maybe he'll never put it together at all. And that's fine. Because this story was never about him, really. It was about me finally stepping out of the shadow of someone else's definition of love and making my own. I don't know if my mother tells people I come home for the holidays anymore. I don't know if she's still trying to pretend, or if she's finally stopped. But if she ever wonders, truly wonders, why I disappeared, why the girl who always showed up stopped knocking on her door, she doesn't have to ask. She already has the answer. Framed. Permanently. Sitting on the mantel between the photo albums and the dust.